recorded session. So it will be available for everyone to watch later on the YouTube, the AfricaNEV YouTube channel. There will be an English language version and a translated version from what Pierre is saying. Please know that if you are listening to the French translation and you want to not hear the original translation, you have the option of turning off the original English version of this conversation. Our topic today is public transport and the role of EVs in Africa. And I will hand over at this juncture to our moderator for the day, Mrs. Anazi Zote Piper. I will implore everybody to turn off their mics when you are not speaking. Thank you very much. Anazi, please take it from here.
Thank you, Gerd. Good afternoon. Welcome to our panel discussion on the topic of public transport in Africa and the role of electric vehicles. Global electric vehicles are booming, and the global sales predictions are on the course to jump 35% this year to 14 million. So according to a recent report published by the International Energy Agencies, EVs are set to displace around 5 million barrels of oil demand a day by 2030. And this is based on the current policy settings. The EV landscape in Africa looks very promising. However, there are a few challenges that are prohibiting the acceleration of EV adoption. So what is holding it back? Well, luckily, our panelists are here to answer that question. Our three distinguished guests are experts in the field, and they range from different parts of the continent. So please hold all of your questions until the end of the discussion if you can. However, if you have a burning question, I will open up to the floor. Speaking of panelists, let's get started with our round of introductions. So you will see let me start with our first panelist. He is an entrepreneur at heart, Dr. Caleb Odotei. He's the CEO of Nodok Logistics, and he is from Ghana. Hello. And then you can say hi, it's fine. Then our second panelist, he's not only a spirited doer, a sustainable growth enthusiast, but we've got Dennis Wakaba, who's also the special project coordinator and business development personnel for Rome in Kenya.
Hello.
Hello. And then our third panelist is Mr. Joseph Mashele, who is the co-chair of the UN Working Party on Pollution and Energy, that's the GRPE, Environmental and Propulsion Performance Requirements, that's the EPPR, for Category L vehicles in.
Hello. Anazi, you've been muted. Anazi, you've been muted.
Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, so let's get this party started. There's a question for Dr. Caleb. I'll start with you. What are the main challenges faced by public transport in African cities? And how do you think that electric vehicles can help address these challenges?
All right, thank you very much, Anazi. When you want to look at the challenges that we face, especially if you put it in the context that electric vehicles are going to solve those challenges, that would be, for the lack of a better word, that would be quite myopic, because the challenges that we face are multidimensional. I would like to approach it from the perspective of passengers first, and then from the perspective of operators, which is where I fall in. All right. So in East Africa, I think in Kenya, they call the kind of public transport system that we have here as matatus. And here in Ghana, we call them as trotros. Basically, they are retrofitted vans and buses that have been imported from Europe, and they ply the routes without any proper regulation. They are generally unsafe, and there's no proper structure, in fact, for them. Most of these operators are private operators, and they have huge overhead costs. So because of that, they are always in a rush from one point to the other to try and make as much sales as they can in a particular day. Right, and I believe anyone listening from any part of Africa will identify with this, depending on where you're coming from, be it East Africa or South Africa, or even West Africa. Okay. All right. Now, for the passengers who are taking these vehicles, the challenges that they face starts with, first, of course, the quality of the vehicles that they use, the high fares because of the huge overhead costs that the operators have to work with. The drivers are mainly unskilled with no proper training, no proper customer service relations, and they are on standardized routes which are unpredictable. There are no reliable schedules. All right, but all these stem from the challenges that the operators, that's the drivers and the owners of the vehicles, the challenges that they face based on the vehicles that they use. Mind you, I told you that they use retrofitted vehicles, which are highly energy inefficient. Some of them don't even know the fuel consumption for their vehicles. So they spend a lot of money on fuel, on maintenance, and then of course on personnel, because once a driver is not behaving well, they have to replace them, etc. And then these are things that are within their sphere to control, as in the overhead costs. The things that are beyond their control are infrastructure. All right, so poor road networks, and then road quality, and then the high cost of asset turnover. By that, I'm talking about the cost of replacing a vehicle once it is damaged. And you put all of this under one main umbrella, which is regulation in the transport sector. Now, when you put all of these together, you get a better appreciation of the challenges that we face when it comes to public transportation. All right. Now, as to what electric vehicles can do to improve public transport in Ghana, it can only go so far. For operators in this sphere, electric vehicles are of great benefits. One, there's a low energy cost. I'm talking about low overhead costs, so low energy costs. For example, for my company, when we decided to switch from from ICE vehicles to electric vehicles, we made savings of about 700%, 600 to 700% in energy costs. This is money that we would have rather spent on fueling, right? But we instead converted that to electricity, spent so little on that, and we're able to channel most of our funds to finance other things to run the business, all right? Now, electric vehicles, aside the low cost of energy, that's just using electricity, there's also a low cost of maintenance. I always describe electric vehicles to people as computers on wheels, because it has very few moving parts, basically just a drive motor, an inverter, or a DC-DC converter, or let's just say a CPU and motor, and then a battery management system, and then a battery, essentially. All right, very few moving parts. And most of these moving parts, when it gets to fixing them, they are basically FRUs, field replacement units, which means once a part is damaged beyond repair, you take it out, replace it with another of the same kind, plug and play, and then you're good to go. So for the 3 years or so that we've been using electric vehicles, for example, our overhead costs have been very low. Now, if I should translate that to the public transport sector, let's say you have an average Joe who is running his own matatu or his own combi or trotro, and he's using an electric vehicle. That means the number of times that he would have to visit the workshop to attend to a host of issues, that is a drive belt being torn or oil leakage or something like that relating to the engine, will be much, much less. So the number of times that his vehicle is going to break down is going to be much less, right? The fuel cost for him is going to be much, much less. I'm going to use, let's say, from Tema to Accra, which are two coastal cities in the Greater Accra region in Ghana here. All right, it's roughly 47.2 kilometers, let's say 50 kilometers to travel with that. Right now, if you have an EV that has a range of around 200 to 300 kilometers, you will spend roughly 50 to 100 Ghana cedis on energy for the entire 300 kilometers that will travel throughout the day, as opposed to someone who is using an ICE vehicle for the same 300 kilometers, and he will have to spend roughly 600 to 800 Ghana cedis on the same thing. Now, this overhead costs, because of this huge overhead cost and the target sales that he has set for himself, he will now have to drive the vehicle in an unsafe manner, which means we'll be overspeeding, driving as quickly as possible from point A to point B to be able to pick as many passengers as possible within that short frame of time. And he's competing against other people. Secondly, because of that, he will have to increase his costs, the cost of, as in the fare will have to go up for the passengers who will be boarding the buses. And such a person is going to concentrate more on his fuel or energy costs instead of keeping the vehicle in a pristine condition. So you're going to keep having rickety vehicles, these retrofitted vehicles that I spoke about, going to have rickety vehicles on the road because they're just concentrated on making target sales. How much fuel can I buy and how much can I squeeze out of it? All right. As opposed to if it was using an electric vehicle, for instance, he can make a lot more savings, about 600, 700%, of which he can take very good care of his vehicle, who will not rush so much to move from point A to point B. And passengers will be satisfied because they'll have a relaxing ride from point A to point B at a low cost or at a stable fair price, regardless of fluctuations in the fuel cost. All right. So to answer the question directly, electric vehicles can only go so far, mainly for the operator, and then that will trickle down to the passengers in improving public transportation. But to solve Africa's public transport problem, we'll need a whole policy or a whole policy overhaul, or we need to put in some proper structures, which will not just focus on infrastructure, but then also make things easier, make operations for operators much easier, where assuming, let's say it was our national policy to use electric vehicles in Ghana, for example, then that means we'll have to concentrate on public infrastructure, as in charging infrastructure for people, as in for operators, making sure that we have good roads, etc. And all these will come together to improve things. Electric vehicles only go so far, but not all the way. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that's a very comprehensive answer. Thank you so much, Dr. Caleb. And I'm going to now move to the other panelists. Dennis, obviously, Caleb mentioned that, lower costs or overhead costs were a main challenge. What are the main challenges faced? What other main challenges are faced in transitioning to electric vehicles for public transport? And how can those challenges be solved?
All right, many thanks for that question. We always focus on challenges as Africans. I don't know why. We usually have opportunities in this angle, maybe attacking them, then being able to leverage on the opportunity, then discover the challenges and embarking on solving that. But onto the question, in terms of public transport, and me being here at home, desires to shift to electric. So they come with a list of questions even before you start engaging. Yeah, and I could tell there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety around electric buses and electric vehicle in general. Essentially, one, it's due to lack of that awareness about this technology, and for cities and urban areas within Africa to start shifting to a more sustainable or zero emission public transport, there are things that need to be taken into consideration, especially for when we've been able to work with a couple of players within the bus industry, not only in Kenya, but also in other markets, such as Tanzania, looking at how can we seamlessly transition you from using diesel buses, which basically have higher cost of ownership in the long run, because for electric you'll be able to save 50% of your fuel savings by using electricity instead of diesel. Then you're looking at major savings of up to 20% of maintenance. So essentially what we do is organize pilots. Yeah. So one solution to reduce on the anxieties and fears is give them the bus, make them try it. In the next week, after 1 week of trial, that perception will have changed. And we are working closely with the Federation of Public Transport here and other players. Here we call them Matatu. I've had another term Matatu being mentioned. And a couple of other challenges, just to mention, is energy. Different countries are at different levels. Kenya right now, we are talking about 90% more green energy. So it makes sense for us to easily transition, and you find electricity cost is more reasonable compared to running your diesel generator just to charge an electric bus. So in terms of energy, we look at availability. You have a connection point, whether it's your big 11 kV cables or 33 kV cables. You can design your depot and put up everything from your high voltage to low voltage systems. Then the other point is to do with adequacy. It may be available, but is it adequate? Now you have to supplement it with other means, whether it's energy storage or let me just say it, diesel generators, just to have, or even battery energy storage, just to keep you in that system of charging the buses. The other means is towards the reliability of that power. Can be adequate, but is it consistently there? How much are the outages, so that you can plan for those, can do your scheduling properly, or whether they are known. If they are known, then you'll be able to rent us the backup solution for your outage. Other things that you've been able to see is to do with capacity, especially drivers fearing to drive an electric bus. Another perception. So in that case, as Rome, we already training a lot of drivers to know how to drive the bus and get as much range based on what you have. We also have challenges as a continent, and I know there are a couple of countries who have led in making resolutions to this, especially to do with standards of the product.
Okay, I think sorry, Dennis. Sorry, Dennis, I think we're losing.
Usually determine the perception. So control aspect, then, and has something happens in the market, then essentially it might backfire on us. Yeah. The other issue is policy and regulation, and also incentives. You have countries such as Rwanda who have been able to pull out a policy paper saying no import duty, incentivizing local assembly and manufacturing. And these are some of the things that we like to see across Africa, and also having these economic blocks where people can actually specialize on items and making sure that we can move the electric mobility transition easier. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I think we were losing you there for a little bit, but we caught you towards the end of that statement. So thank you so much. I'm sure Joseph can attest to some of the lack of energy resources that we're experiencing here in South Africa. Joseph, what are the potential economic, environmental, and social benefits of electric public transport for Africa?
Thank you so much, Anazi. I think, firstly, we have to acknowledge that already the public transport sector does contribute significantly to the economy, so the means of transporting passengers and in other cases goods as well is already an economic activity which plays a huge role, and the significance thereof is also very much crucial. So obviously the new energy is a plus or a benefit, to the economy of the continent, in that, while you are reducing traffic congestion, you are doing that obviously by having other associated benefits such as improved air quality. As we all know that obviously electric vehicles will emit obviously less or zero greenhouse gas emissions, and that obviously is a big benefit, in terms of environmental impact that electric vehicles bring in terms of the public sector. But also socially, as we might know that, within the value chain of public transport, there's normally other associated economic activities, be it at the taxi rank or bus station along the routes. There's also other economic activity. So what electric vehicles or electrification of the public transport will do is to have inclusive mobility, so other stakeholders and other role players within society will be able to participate in this new technology per se, so electrifying the public sector transport is really going to benefit, some of our people and also drive economic growth. Some of the examples is that, as we know that there are sometimes food stalls in and around taxi or bus stations. I mean, electrification of this public sector will also motivate some of these vendors as well, to participate in this economy. And then also we have, due to lack of road infrastructure as well, we can have also smaller vehicles which can be electrically fueled, or the drivetrain can be electrical, and that obviously includes other role players as well to come into the space and then also participate in this new technology of electrical propulsion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please stay on the screen because I've got a follow-up question for you. Some of the other panelists did touch on this as well regarding charging infrastructure across the continent. How do you think governments and private sector can work together to make sure there's enough charging infrastructure for electric public transport?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. As we know that government has a role obviously to serve the people it governs, and then also from the private sector perspective, businesses are there obviously in existence for commercial reasons. But I think end of the day, the two, if they're joined together or they're married together, there can be a win-win situation in that we can make things better. So I think if there's more stakeholder engagement between government and the public sector, we are able to obviously to come up with new ideas and look at policy framework, and then also be able to devise plans and then implement some of those plans. So if you refer to the actual charging infrastructure as well, there'll be certain innovation that coming from the private sector as well. But this does not mean that government does not have a role, or its role is just to provide incentives or tax or put up tax measures in place to frustrate or to create stumbling blocks for this new innovation. But government as well can be there, because it partly owns some of the infrastructure, so I think ongoing stakeholder engagement, and then with proper plans, and then also follow-ups as well, can be helpful in that we can have a good charging infrastructure within accessible means for the people. Because I think one of the big challenges as well, especially in our continent, is that obviously the charging infrastructure, in that it's in pockets and it's scattered in such a way that it drives obviously the notion that we're not ready for the introduction of electrification of transportation sector as a whole. But I think this can be maneuvered by government and the private sector working closely together, in that they engage more frequently, but also not just talk shops, but also have follow-up plans, and then also monitoring after implementation as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That sounds like a really good plan, and it definitely does need to be implemented. I want to remind the audience, if you're watching from anywhere you're watching at home, please note down your questions. We also have a chat, I think, that you have access to, where you can write your question there for the panelists. And I'll try to take one or two in between. It seems like we're still good for time, so you can just drop a question on the chat. Question for you, Caleb. What role can innovation and technology play in improving public transport? And how can electric vehicles be integrated with other modes of transport?
All right, thank you very much, Anazi. Yeah. All right, I would, before that, contrary to what Joseph was saying, okay, not contrary, but I would like to deviate slightly from what he was saying, in that I've always believed that the private sector is actually the one that's actually going to drive change in this country. I can't mention a number of stakeholder meetings and consultations we've held with government and international bodies who are even trying to convince the Ghanaian government that electric vehicles are the way to go, and they'll tell you, well, it's in the policy, it's in the pipeline, and we're working on it, and what, and nothing happens. Even for us in the private sector, when we decided to switch to electric vehicles, and I realized that this is not something that's beyond anyone. It's actually very easy to adopt. For us as the private sector, maybe we have some access to some money to be able to drive these things, but it really doesn't take that much to innovate and change to electric vehicles, right? Now, to answer your question, as in what role innovation and technology can play in improving the public transport system. Currently, my company operates in the private sector, not in the public sector. So we deal with companies and stuff, all right? But some of the things that we've adopted in the private sector can be translated to the public sector. We actually have a roadmap for public transport in Ghana, all right? So I would like to take it starting from the ride-hailing cabs, that's the Ubers and Bolts, and taxis, and then where the government comes in, BRT, and then to the private operators, that's the Trotro or Matatus. Okay, all right. Now, if let's say I had the funds to incorporate these people, or to bring these people into the EV space, this is what I would probably do. For the Uber vehicles to start with, and that's what most of the middle class use here in West Africa and in Ghana, all right, this is what I would do. I'll get a few, maybe 10, 20 to start with, 10, 20 small electric vehicles. They cost maybe between $8,000 to $10,000 each. All right, give it to operators, just like what Move is doing in the UK, in the US, and in other parts of Africa. Give it to these guys. they travel on average less than 100 kilometers. We did some research. They travel less than 100 kilometers in a particular day. And most of these vehicles have a range of around 200 to 300 kilometers, which means they have more than enough range to be able to carry out their daily activities. All right. Not all African countries are blessed with electricity access. South Africa is currently struggling with electricity, and in some other parts of Africa, electricity coverage is very low. But for the major cities, at least, I know that the electricity coverage is good enough. All right. So let's say we've given these 10 to 20 vehicles to private operators on a work and pay basis. All right. Their overhead costs are low to start with. Charging infrastructure, for most of them, they'll park during the nights. They have about 10 to 12 hours to charge at home. They can set up their charging infrastructure at home, and they're good enough to top up whatever they've expended, about 100 kilometers or so of their total range of 300. And then they top up and then they go and work again. So they have very low overhead costs to start with, which means within a year or two, they should be able, let's say even within 5 years, they should be able to pay off the cost of their vehicle and then run smoothly as an own the vehicles and then be able to run these Ubers or ride-hailing cabs on their own, working for themselves and then serving the public at that level. For the passengers that are going to be using this, I mean, the technology already exists because the ride-hailing cabs already have ways to connect the passengers to the drivers. All right, so for the passengers, one, they are going to have lower costs of traveling, which means more people are going to be using these ride-hailing cabs, knowing that one, their cost is much lower than others. And then secondly, for the operators, they're going to make much more money, which means all others who are using ICE vehicles will like to leave their ICE vehicles and then jump onto this electric vehicle scheme, where they would own an electric vehicle and then make much more money, and as in make much more profit, and as in the business be more profitable for them. The same thing can be translated to the taxi space. And for us in Ghana, the taxis usually work, they serve as the last mile transport, where a bus comes to drop someone off at a junction, and then they live, let's say, in an estate which is deep inside, or maybe a place that is completely off the route. So they get to their junction, they hop onto a taxi, and that takes them home. They can either rent a taxi for themselves, or it will be a shared cab with 3 or 4 other people, and then they get to their destination. Now, for these last mile transporters, usually their vehicles are rickety, right? And of course, high fuel costs, they're always breaking down several times. They break down in the middle of nowhere and they tell you to go on your own. If these people were also using these electric vehicles, similar scheme to what we would introduce, let's say we would introduce to the ride-hailing cab operators, right? They'll also make their money very quickly. And mind you, those people even charge much more than the ride-hailing cabs per kilometer, because it's a last mile thing and you have no choice but to take them to be able to get to your destination. They charge much more. Right? So cost of operation.
Okay, they don't. Catch on to know this. On family and one.
Cost of operation is going to be low for them as well, similar to the ride-hailing cabs, and their profit margin is going to be much higher. And again, that would translate to the passengers and then the overall ecosystem, where public transport, one, from the ride-hailing cabs, and then for their last mile transport is much more improved. Not to even talk about the emissions and all that, those things are already mentioned, but cost is going to be lower. Transportation is going to be more efficient for Ubers and taxis. Now let's scale it up to the government sector. They are the ones who come in with BRTs. Okay. All right. So in Ghana, we currently have one, which is the Ayalolu, and they are having serious problems because of the cost of diesel. They often run for a short period and then they have to park, and the government is always in debt to these oil marketing companies because they can't afford the high cost of diesel, not to mention those who are even siphoning fuel because it is government anyway. So they go park and they siphon the diesel out of it. Now, if we were for this, we'll just have to copy what is being done in the West, especially in Asia, like China, where they are using electric vehicles for their BRT systems, right? And for an individual or for any private person to go buy one of these BRT vehicles is cost prohibitive. It's, I think, one BRT that we check, as in for that side, that takes about 50 people. It's around $150,000 to $200,000 for one bus. And if you run your analytics, you realize that it's going to take you more than 10 years to break even. So it's not profitable for any private individual to go into that. But if the government were to adapt these electric vehicles into the system instead, right? One, what's electricity going to siphon? There's nothing to siphon to start with. Cost of electricity, like I said, is much, much lower, and they'll be charging at their BRT stations. The government can afford to, even if they don't decrease their price, because BRT prices are even they're already very low. So the government can afford to, or the government now has opportunity to make a killing in profits from operating these BRT buses, which will automatically translate to better salaries for their drivers, and then an overall improvement in the BRT transport ecosystem. The benefit is for passengers who are boarding a vehicle from one point to the other, they know that so long as I have this fixed amount of money, maybe 1 Ghana cedi or 2 Ghana cedis, it can take me from point A to point B, as we see in most parts of the West and in China and other places. Actually, in the city in which I schooled in China, from 2010 to 2016, the costs of transportation was 1 RMB, regardless of where you are going. And when I went back to visit in 2018, it was still 1 RMB. I can't point out any single African country that's been able to maintain prices for public transportation at that level for that longer period. And they can afford to do that because they're able to control their energy costs. And bringing that to our setting, assuming we were having BRTs that were run on electricity owned by government, the lower and middle class people, even if you're upper class and you want to ride a BRT from one point to the other, you know, all you need is maybe 1 or 2 Ghana, so whatever it is, a fixed amount of money, and you can move from point A to point B seamlessly. That will, I can't even begin to imagine the repercussions or the improvement that will bring to the well-being of the general population, and how that will basically improve the quality or the feel that passengers have whenever they board the public transport system. People will actually begin to abandon their ICE vehicles in preference to this BRT, which will translate to greater revenue for whoever is operating it, which is the government or whichever private person they decide to partner with, and then greater profits, and then a cleaner environment because you're using electric vehicles. And basically, it would be like just being in the West or being in Europe or in Asia somewhere and traveling by bus, which is the preferred mode of transport. And that will greatly improve our transport system. Then to the last group, that is the trotro or the matatu people, all right? Again, that one falls mainly on private operators, all right? I've already highlighted the benefits that we had, about 600, 700% improvement, as in reduction in overhead costs. And by that, I mean fuel and then maintenance when we decide to switch to electric vehicles, all right? So assuming that these operators were using these electric urban buses, all right? Now, a 16-seater bus will cost roughly $18,000 to $20,000. That's cost prohibitive, but there are even second-hand ones that cost much less, about $10,000 or so. Now, for the average private operator, they may not go in for that because it's too expensive. If we say they should even retrofit theirs and then put in electric components, they will not be able to do it because it's also cost prohibitive. But the operators like myself who have access to some money and can afford to buy maybe 10 of these buses and then give it to these people to operate. And that's actually the way I would go about it. We piloted something like that a few months ago, just to test it out, and we've pulled back again, right? So we give about 10 of these buses to private operators, and on a work, just similar to the Uber system, on a work to pay or work to pay and then own later, something, let's say an operating lease, we give it to them. Now, these drivers will again not rush to move from point A to point B. They'll take their time. Let's say they set a target for themselves that they're going to transport about 100 people cumulatively in a day, right? They can do that comfortably, relax, without having to speed up against an inefficient ICE vehicle, which is just about 30% efficient. as compared to the electric vehicle, which is about 90% efficient. So they'll be able to make more savings in energy costs. They can afford to bring their prices down, which means that they would drive the operators of the ICE vehicles out. Basically, they'll outcompete them, and people, as in passengers, who prefer to sit in these electric vehicles, which have been bought by, mind you, have been bought by some much more well-to-do people and given to them, right? And eventually, it's just going to be like the Uber system, where passengers will feel more comfortable riding in these vehicles at a lower cost. They're not rickety, they feel safe, because whoever is operating these structural buses, which are electric, now has more money to invest in training their drivers because they want them to stand out. They have more money to make sure that their vehicles are kept in pristine condition. And the savings that they will make within a year or two, they can afford to turn that asset over, either add more or replace the vehicles that they have and then move them to much to other routes. For example, the bus that we started with in 2020, over time the range decreases. That was an early edition Changan E60 with a range of around 150 kilometers, and currently is doing around 120 to 130 kilometers, and is driven extensively, right? Assuming, so for us, for example, we've moved it to shorter routes so that we'll be able to make the range, right? Assuming we've given such buses to these structural operators at a discounted price, because at the time I got it was around $20,000, that was 2020 thereabout. If I can give it to someone for, let's say, 10,000 or even less than that, $10,000 on a work to pay basis, and that person can use it. Later on, maybe 3 years time, that person can also decide to move it onto a much less used route. And then eventually, as in you just keep passing it down the line to shorter routes until eventually the 10 years for the lifespan of the battery is up, and then they replace the battery or they break it down for parts or whatever. But whatever it is, it will be a better use of the bus as compared to the ICE vehicle. Just to sum up about your question on how electric vehicles can be integrated with this, I've broken it down, starting from those vehicles that serve mainly the middle and upper class, that's the Ubers, and then the taxis, and then down to the general population, the lower classes, where they use trotros, etc. And even involving, that's if the government should get involved with BRTs along the value chain, regardless of where you stand. If we are using electric vehicles, mainly with private sector participation or private sector investment, or even with government investment into the sector, there's no loss anywhere. And it can easily be integrated, even if we do not have adequate public infrastructure for charging. Even if our routes are terrible, these buses can select where they drive along, and then there's a taxi that's ready to take off for the last mile transport. Regardless of where you are in the transport ecosystem, if we should integrate these electric vehicles in there, it's a win-win for whoever participates in that, or whoever invests in that. I don't see any shortfall anywhere. In places where electricity access is lower, yes, then maybe we can think of using some of these ICE vehicles, maybe on the outskirts, etc. But the overall effects on the national transportation sector, the improvements will be great. It is better than having nothing at all. It's better than our current status, where we are mainly driving in populated cities using ICE vehicles. All right. So it is very possible to integrate this, and it doesn't take that much for the government or for the private sector. It doesn't take that much. And if you're a private person and you are listening and you have some money, and do what most people, instead of buying ICE vehicles, connecting one small city to the other, or one small town to the other, you can invest in an electric vehicle, and the savings that you make will be, in fact, you'll be overwhelmed, as I've been overwhelmed ever since 2020. All right. So that's my submission on that. Thank you.
Thank you. You did touch on the economic benefits, but let's say someone at home who is, because unemployment is very high, the unemployment rate is very high right now, and I'm sure it's the case across all the countries in Africa. So if I'm sitting at home right now and I'm thinking, okay, how does this apply to me? What are some of the potential job opportunities that come with the adoption of electric public transport?
Okay, is that to me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So it depends on whether the person is coming in as someone who is looking for a job in that sector, or someone who is looking to make some money. All right. As a private investor or whatever. So let's say you're sitting at home, your unemployment is high, you've graduated, maybe you studied engineering or administration or whatever. All right. For those of us who use electric vehicles, data analytics is very, very important to us. Just a week ago, I hired somebody with a background in accounting. He's been out of a job for about 5 years, right after graduating university. But then I just tested his analytical skills, and it was very good. And God will testify that I like data a lot. So I just asked him to come and give him some data to work with. And then based on what he was able to churn out of that data, I think that the reports that he was able to churn out of that data is influencing how we operate currently. All right. So he's just adding on to basically what I've built over the years. All right. So there's opportunity in data analytics. Let's say you have a background in even mechanical work or whatever. There's the right opportunity for you to hop onto the EV space, because whether you like it or not, it is coming. And in about 10, 15 years, Europe is going to dump their first edition electric vehicles on us, whether we like it or not. They're going to dump it on us. And then let's say you studied how to handle carburetors, etc., and you've not upgraded yourself, you're going to be out of a job. Basically, your unemployment is just going to get worse, because someone younger who knows something about electric vehicles is going to come and take over and work on those electric vehicles that are coming. So there's space there for employment as well. If you are a driver, growing up, my dad always said, if you don't know how to do anything at all, learn how to do certain things, such as driving, such as cooking, or basically household things, how to fix certain little things, because you never know when they'll come in handy. All right. So let's say you're sitting at home, you're unemployed. Do you know how to drive? If you don't know how to drive, go learn how to drive. Because for we operators, currently I have people who have degrees and masters, as an undergrad degrees and then postgraduate degrees, who are driving for me, and they're replacing those who finished junior high school or primary school in my company, because now I'm using IT to work. They use apps, and it's not just about reading it, right? It's not just about sitting behind the steering wheel and turning it left, right, center. Basically, the driving profession is becoming like the piloting. It's become like the aviation field, at least in my company. So you've graduated, whatever it is, and you don't know how to drive, you are practically useless to me. I don't care what degree you have. So you learn how to drive as well. So data analytics, engineering, mechanical work, driving, HR, anything. It's an entire ecosystem that's, regardless of what you study, regardless of what you know, just follow the trend of electric EV adoption, see where you can fit yourself, and then come in there. As for employment, we are looking to take in a lot of people. So I don't know if that answers your question. I felt like I was going off a bit.
No, that definitely hits the nail on the head. So yeah, if you're out there, just know there's an opportunity for you at Nodok Logistics.
Yes,
Dennis,
yes.
I'd like to come to you. This question's for you, Dennis. Rome is quite successful, but what are some of the other examples of successful electric public transport initiatives across Africa? And what lessons can we learn from these experiences?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know whether we are yet, success is very relative. So every day we keep on improving and learning also to make even the products and operations better. So essentially in Kenya, right now we have about 90 electric buses. These are buses that can actually offset up to about 1,000 or even above 1,000 tons of CO2, which is very significant. So if you look at the potential that we have in terms of emission mitigation across, if you ramp up to 1,000, 10,000 buses, you see now that's success, yeah, in one aspect. So you're also looking at operations and getting to know whether these drivers or these operators are confident enough to onboard buses. It has been slow, and because of the challenges I mentioned about the fear, so it cuts across many jurisdictions. Yeah. So there's usually this notion of if I get an electric bus, where will I charge? Where will I do my maintenance? Are there spots available? So until we get to that level where those questions are no longer on the table every time we engage, but looking at African-wide, you can mention a few countries being really good. And is one of them. We have electric public transport initiatives in South Africa, in Ghana, and maybe I should congratulate Senegal. Right now, it's going to have the first electric BRT in Africa. I think also other initiatives being Ethiopia and also Egypt. So Africa is slowly getting there, and it's just a matter of overcoming barriers, especially looking at that ecosystem from electric bus manufacturers, how they can actually manufacture product that is market fit for that particular city or for that particular client. Second thing is putting in place a proper after-sales service so that whenever you have an issue, the resolution time is less than a day, an hour, depending on the sort of challenge they have. Because once you resolve quickly, then the uptime is what guarantees a returning customer. As soon as you have an electric bus doing at least 95% uptime compared to diesel buses, which average between 80%, 90% when they're new. And after 4 years, they start averaging even less than 70%. You can study fleets that are running diesel and you could actually see BRT systems with maybe 300 buses, but you find 50 buses always under good maintenance. So essentially, electric buses is an opportunity to change that. Also, looking at another success parameter is to do with acceptability of technology by passengers. For us, as well, we've seen a lot of hype, a lot of, they feel good when they're dignified. In this case, when you have a public transport that is working for them, first of all, the convenience, the cleanliness, removing a bit of that old culture and bringing a new system. I would say electric mobility and electric bus in public transport serve as an opportunity to actually change a lot of these traditional aspects that you had, yet maintaining quality service. So I think it's a good opportunity for this space, and with time, countries should start rolling out a lot of pilots just to create that understanding and removing those fears. This is something that I've noted, experienced, and that's what we have been doing for the last 2 years. But overall, we are moving on well, and maybe we can also look at other aspects where we can, entrench successful parameters. Thank you, Anazi.
Wow, thank you so much. So Senegal, Ghana, Kenya, and SA are the countries to look out for there. Thank you. I'm going to take one last question, and then we're going to take it to the floor. So Joseph, what do you think are the next steps for government, public transport operators, and other stakeholders to advance the transition to electric public transport in Africa?
Thank you. I think that's a key question. And I think some of these aspects Dr. Caleb did mention as well. I think from a government perspective, it is important that the legislative framework is set, all the standards and regulations that govern all the different aspects around electric vehicle technology need to be set and need to be in place, So there needs to be clear policy direction and strategies from government entities, and then also the technical infrastructure entities as well need obviously to have the enabling standards and regulations as well to enforce these government imperatives. And these can cover from your safety operation, as you may know that, electric vehicles as well come with other safety risks, in terms of fire and so forth. So obviously there needs to be standards that govern all of that. And then also issues around trade matters as well, so as diverse as our continent is, there needs to be more effort to ensure that obviously our regulations and our standards as well talk to each other as well, such that, whether the vehicle or the charging infrastructure is from the west or from the east or even locally developed as well, there is some sort of synergy and as well as communication between the different products and services as well. Also from the operation point of view, I think Dr. Caleb also mentioned this quite in detail. I think there needs to be an upskilling, and I think also Dennis touched on this as well about the fears. I think once we move past the fears, of some of the, introduction of new technology or the change, obviously they need to embrace the technology and then try to upskill themselves in that they need to get to know the new systems, the new products, the new components that are involved, and see how they can also remain in the game. I think it was mentioned earlier as well about the low running cost of an electric vehicle, for instance. So but within that there is certain aspects which will require certain skill, which some of it can be acquired, through further learning and also adding to already existing knowledge and experience as well. But also, I think what is important as well is that other stakeholders as well are presented with an opportunity to be also involved in this electrification space, in that there's an opportunity for innovation. We see it in many parts, when you travel throughout Africa, I think we are very creative, so some of these electric vehicles can be used also through the vehicle to grid or vehicle to vehicle technology to power up either the households or other smaller products. And I mean the innovation potential is very big, so I think there's an opportunity for many other stakeholders to get involved and also participate in this new technology, and obviously this will result in benefits for our continent, and then also create also sustainability, in terms of our economic growth and future prospects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And yeah, I certainly agree with you. I think we need to look at the innovation, get past the fears, and get to a place where we actually implement the transition instead of talking about it. So now we are actually going to my favorite part of this panel. You, the audience, you can ask any questions to the panelists. I'll start with 2 questions. I already see some questions coming up. I want to just make sure that we stick to time. So either type the question on the chat, or you can raise your hand and then ask directly to the panelists that you want to ask. So we've got a question here from Andrew Kamanu. I hope I'm not butchering your name. Thanks for the great panelists. Was wondering how soon can we see electric mobility commutes? Example, a 14-seater matatu on our everyday commute in Africa? And what's the policy framework needed to expedite this? So in no particular order, I think maybe if any of the panelists can answer his question, throwing it to you. Dr. Caleb, looks like you have an answer.
Okay, all right. So I told you we piloted something like this a few months ago. That was in Accra here, mainly from my hospital, Kolebu, to other places. But we're using diesel vehicles. Just wanted to see, wanted to set a threshold to see if it was possible as we were operating in that space, and it was feasible. As to replacing them with electric vehicles, we've targeted within the next 5 years to introduce them in bits, taking certain routes. All right, so the high demand routes, because it has to be feasible. So we're going in Accra. So for those of you listening in Ghana, we are thinking of the routes from Tema to Accra. That's what most people commuting across the motorway. Basically targeting highways and Tema to Accra, and then from Accra Central towards Ayi Mensa, which is basically tarred throughout, and it's a multi-carriage highway. Want to start with that. Based on the success of that, we'll hop on to more routes and then start targeting more. But within the next 5 years, we are hoping to get enough saturation with electric vehicles. That's hoping that the economy is stable or at least improves, because the vehicles are expensive. As to the policy required for that, it's challenging here because it's semi-regulated when it comes to operating in the public sector. So far we've not had any challenges, but I expect, as always happens, once we start to gain traction, the governments will find ways of milking us. But as to get started, there's already a policy framework for starting public transport. Nothing for electric vehicles per se, but that's what we are using. Basically, as a private operator, you just have to get a license from the local, the municipal authority or metropolitan authority, and then you can start work. Yeah. I don't know if any other person has an answer. Yeah.
That's a good answer. Do any of the other panelists have? Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, maybe I would like to respond to Andrew. Looking at the way cities are growing in terms of the capacity of the vehicle mover or the people mover rather, we are going high capacity, and you find that most 14-seaters now are more practical in remote areas or intercity. And the problem with electric vans right now is range. You find that with your electric 14-seater, you'll be able to do 400 right now, 400 kilometers right now comfortably. And that has been a challenge because there are a lot of, let's say, Matatu circles who want us to shift, but they say we don't have enough passenger volume to buy a bigger unit. Essentially, we have to use the 14-seater. But there's that question of range, and there's also issues to do with policy, where government is trying to encourage mass transit systems and also higher capacity buses. So essentially, it's something that can be done specifically for specific zones, but looking at cities, probably looking at higher capacity buses. But in terms of policy and also accessibility of these vehicles, you might look at financial mechanisms, whether it's leasing to own, because the other question is affordability. Find a 14-seater Matatu which is electric, cost about $80,000 landing cost, compared to a diesel one which is around 30 to 40,000. So also that high upfront costs and the capex is also prohibitive towards the shift. So we're looking at either government reducing tax on those, and just to create more accessibility so that those areas that need the 14-seaters are catered for. That's my take.
Thank
if
you. Yeah, you can jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to just add on to what Dennis was saying as well. The issue of cost is very much obviously a key factor in obviously the advancement of from your small passenger vehicles to your large passenger vehicles as well. But there is currently investments obviously from bigger stakeholders who are able to afford that. And also through the developments worldwide as well, we are beginning to see a shift, you know, with the price parity between ICE vehicles and EVs getting smaller and smaller. And obviously in time, you know, it will be costing more or less the same. And I think, as it was mentioned as well, you know, that government and public sector working together, you know, they can have enabling means and incentives to encourage such investments, you know, such that it will become more feasible, you know, to invest in this new technology going forward. And then obviously being able to provide the electric buses as well for communities as well. And also internationally, there is developments to increase the battery ranges of most vehicles as well. And I think in no time as well, we'll be able to receive some of these new technology as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Just a reminder, when the panelists are talking, please mute your mic. There is a French translation if you prefer to listen in French, and there's also an English translation if you obviously English. So we've got another question here for Doc from Elliot Nati. Doc, what's the reliability as far as using these buses for Trotro, Matatu, seeing the kind of pressure and rough usage these vehicles are typically subjected to? A lot of the existing ICE Trotros are built by traditional coach builders, and they can endure the abuse for well over 10 years.
All right. All right. So Elliot, electric vehicles are heavier. All right. For our electric vehicles, the suspension system is much more stronger than its comparative ICE vehicle. Actually, we use them on rough terrain as well, even in the private sector, and they hold their own very well. I'll say they even hold it much better than the ICE vehicles in some instances. Now, with regards to the pressure that they'll be subject to, as in because they're in a rush and they're always bouncing through. If I'm a private person and I'm investing in the Matatu or Trotro space, I'm going, like I said, I'll rather pilot on the smooth routes first, and then put smaller vehicles on the last mile resort, as in those that will go into the inner suburbs on rough roads, maybe take 10 people at a time. And with proper training, I mean, like what we've done with our drivers and stuff, whenever they're driving through rough roads, there's a protocol to follow and all that. But you ask yourself, why do these Trotro operators rush to and abuse their vehicles as much as they do? Is because of the rush to make as much back as possible. All right, now with the EVs coming in, and hopefully, like Joseph said, when the price point even comes down, so acquiring an EV is not going to be as prohibitive as it is now. The cost of operation is going to be low, etc. That rush element will be taken away unless the person wants to be greedy, for instance. But if you do that and you destroy your vehicle, it's just similar to you destroying your ICE vehicle. But so their steadiness and their reliability and their strength in handling the rough terrain, they are more than capable of handling them. They are actually built very, very well. And they have standards to live up to, because mind you, if it's not that protected or it's not that steady and something should go wrong, the consequence of an electric vehicle crashing or breaking down is much worse than having an ICE vehicle break down or crash. All right, so they are built very well. They can handle our roads very well. I don't know if that answers your question. All right, Elliot, yes.
Really, it does. Really, it does. Okay, I am going to take one last question if there is. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up. Any other questions from the audience? Just raise your hand or write it in the chat. All right.
Maybe,
yeah.
maybe as they prefer to ask a question, just to add on what the question by Elliot is to do with, the vehicles are developed robustly to handle any condition, any terrain, but we also look at behavioral aspects by drivers and also by passengers. It's also something or an angle that should be enforced, that you're able to tell the driver during the rains, is the way you drive an electric vehicle. If it's a rough road, take care of the vehicle and navigate it. So there's also that element of training towards handling the vehicle much better, because it's still an expensive piece of asset. So that's the point I wanted to emphasize.
Thank you, Dennis. We've got one question here from Gaurav. He says, what can be the future of electric three-wheelers in Kenya and Ghana? I'll let Joseph answer that one first, and then if anyone else has any input.
Thanks for that question. I think those modes of transport as well are still very much relevant in West and East Africa, but as well as other parts as well. But speaking from experience, I think what we've seen in South Africa is that mostly the three-wheelers, and especially electric ones, they are used for your goods vehicles, and especially, as mentioned before, your last mile transport, and especially for your e-commerce entities. You know, they deliver their stock at the warehouse, and then these three-wheelers are able to transport those from the warehouse to the homes of the customers. And that obviously, them being electrically propelled is a good option, in that obviously there's sustainability issues in terms of operation cost, less obviously things to fix or components to maintain throughout the lifespan of that particular vehicle. And then also obviously what we've stated already in terms of environmental benefits. So I think there's very much still use for electric or three-wheeler motorcycles or three-wheeler vehicles in those regions, but as well as other regions within the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add? Gaurav says thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our panel discussion. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just give one closing statement, one summary of the whole thing in 1 minute. Who would like to go first? Let's start in the order that we started. I'll start with you, Dr. Caleb, and then Dennis, and then Joseph.
All right. Thank you very much. Just in conclusion, we are a testament that using electric vehicles in the transport sector, especially in the private sector, has been very, very rewarding. And I can't begin to imagine the rewards we'll get if we should venture into the public sector. It's going to be a huge game changer. I forgot one thing. The government is also trying to adopt something like that. At the last stakeholder meeting that we had, they were also trying to adopt EVs for the BRT system. And once that comes in, I think transport is going to improve greatly on this continent, especially for Ghana and then for the entire continent. Yes. So that's all I have to say. And thank you all very much. You've been great.
Awesome. You, Dennis?
Yep. So my take is actually saying that electric mobility is the future. And for all the steps that you're taking, it's important that every player is consistent, that we gradually scale, the adoption, and also seeing how to fix the challenges of energy access, of making the products more accessible, whether it's through financial models, whether it's through optimization, and essentially to make sure that products are really market fit. So I would encourage all of us to keep consistently talking about electric vehicles until we reach a stage where we have critical mass and adoption is quickly accelerated. So I'm glad to be part of this panel and looking forward to further engagements in the future. Thank you very much and good day to you all. As you are muted.
Yeah. Yeah, she's still muted.
Maybe Joseph, if you go.
Yes, thank you so much. So from my side as well, and hopefully this can also answer the last question I saw in the chat as well. And I think as I mentioned already by Dennis that electric mobility is the future. And I mean, there's been studies and papers written about, you know, the state of obviously greenhouse gas emissions in the continent. So what I would say that we have to embrace the new technology and then also encourage innovation. And I think also another benefit of us not being at the forefront of, you know, of this emerging technology as well, is that we get to learn from others, you know, from other regions in the world. And not only learn from them, but also be able to implement better systems. And also, obviously, when you talk about economics as well, you know, we might not be having the financial means to support certain initiatives that are being implemented elsewhere. However, from those learnings, we can see what can be best fit for us, for our people, to serve our people. So when we talk about things like incentives or tax exemptions and so forth, you know, I think many other countries in the East, in the West as well, have implemented different policies and mechanisms which we can learn from, and then also localize them, and which will serve both our people as well, and ensure that there is still economic growth for the continent. And I'm also very, very grateful to be part of this important engagement, and I hope this is definitely not the last, and looking forward to further engagements of such topics. Thank you.
Anazi?
Okay, I think that our moderator is having issues, but I believe, okay, she's not coming back. But this has been a very fruitful panel. This is part of the AfricaNEV webinar series on sustainable energy and transport. Next month, so far, this is the 4th of the year, but next month we are moving to a double header, a series of double headers. So next month, for example, normally the webinar is the last Thursday of every month, but next month, on the 27th, there's a panel. Sorry, that's the 25th. There's a panel on the state of charging infrastructure in Africa. Then on the 31st, there is electric vehicle financing schemes in Africa, part 1, with a focus on the banking sector. That panel will be moderated by Josh Will, the CEO of Ampersand. Then the first panel on the 25th will be moderated by our own moderator, that is Ruta Alora, a Kenyan, Josh Will, obviously American, who is in Rwanda. That should be interesting. Then the men after that will move into part 2 of that conversation, where we talk about insurance and whatnot and whatnot. And also, I believe on the 12th, of this coming month, there will be a training, EV vehicle repair and maintenance training in Kenya. That will be on the details will be on the AfricaNEV platform. So if you're in Kenya or in Eastern Africa, you want to acquire the actual skills. The highlight of that training is the ability to disassemble an EV completely down and reassemble it. So by the time you finish that training, you should be able to do that for Nissan as well as others. And we'll be rolling out more of such trainings as and when it's appropriate along the various African countries. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for our wonderful moderator. She's my personal person with the energy. And our wonderful panelists from Josh, Caleb. Anazi, you're muted. I say something. You're on mute. Okay, we can hear you. Thank you very much. The French translation will be available. The French translation will be available. All these webinars will be on the AfricaNEV YouTube channel in due course, both in English and in French. Bye-bye, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
See you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Anazi, thank you very much. That was interesting. I dare say fun. So we'll talk more.